So in the coming days, we're going to hear a lot about Jalen Carter. He's one of the best, football players in college football this past year. Dominant. It was one of the biggest reasons that Georgia really took over games against LSU and the Gators. But what's Georgia's defensive line going to look like in 2023 without Jalen Carter? Um, that's really the question, the thing we're going to talk about and really delve into deep right now. And I think if you look at the 2022 season, you saw a fair amount of what it would look like in some of these games. Um, as time went on, Jalen Carter got hurt, obviously, either heading into the Oregon game or during the Oregon game, or it compounded and so forth. But by the Missouri game, which he got knocked out of, he wasn't really playing a lot. And so we saw that stretch of time from Auburn, Florida, well, Auburn, Vanderbilt, and to some degree Florida, what it was like to for the Dogs defensive line against those teams. Now, those weren't great teams. Let's just be straight up about it. None of those were really good teams. Auburn's got a long way to go. Vanderbilt's probably the worst team in the league, and Florida seems to be more of a mess than I anticipated they would be. Even with the change that they had. But in those games, Florida had 100 yards rushing. They were only one of three teams this season that had, excuse me, four teams this season that had 100 yards or more rushing the football, against Georgia, and they had 100. Auburn had 93, Vanderbilt had 45. So 90 is almost 95 really is almost the demarcation point for if you're going to do anything against Georgia, because sometimes you just kind of can't help but get run yards. But when Jalen got back in there, only one team from that point forward had 100 yards rushing against Georgia, and that was Ohio State. It had 119, and the bulk of those yards, I would imagine, were from, and I'm going to look this up now, were from C.J. Stroud, and he really had a good game. Hey, make sure, listen, we're going to be sending out double dogs later this week to the folks who have ordered it at the beginning. If you order today, you're going to get confetti, excuse me, from Georgia's national championship win. Make sure you're picking up double dogs today. We still have orders of Dogstruction as well. So pick these books up now, and make sure you get them in your hands before, while we've got them available. Yeah, I mean, Stroud he had some sacks. He had 27 yards of sacks, but he had 37 yards rushing. And that excuse me, he had 34 yards rushing. That's a lot. And that got them over the 119, over the 100 yard mark by with 19 to spare. But I think when you start looking at like Zion Logue and Bear Alexander, obviously Mikael Williams, there's a lot to work with here on this defensive line. I mean, we've seen the emergence, in my view, of Nazir Stackhouse. When I went to go see Nazir play, he was a junior, I think, in high school. Gosh, I can't remember. But, I remember talking to some folks behind the scenes that are recruiting folks, like, that's literally what they do. And they were like, I don't know about, Stackhouse. I'm not sure. But watching him play that day, I was pretty certain that Nazir Stackhouse would be a pretty good player for Georgia. I didn't know if he was going to be elite. Zion Logue the same way. He just ate up so much space, and Zion Logue was far more athletic than I think people realize that he was or is. But those two guys right there, along with Warren Brinson, who really had a good close to the season, uh, that's the trio that is going to, you can form everything else around. But those aren't the only guys. The emergence of Bear Alexander at the end of the season, I think, is an important aspect of what you're dealing with. Ingram Dawkins had a good season as well, but this is a group that, keep in mind, they lost Nolan Smith halfway through the season, and they had to juggle some things. But Nazir had it might not be the same amount of impact on the game, but his his impact was not on the quarterback the same way that Jalen Carter's was. Okay, therefore probably not the same as on the game. Okay, that's the biggest thing. But Nazir was the most productive defensive lineman in terms of tackles that Georgia had. Now, part of that's because Jalen played in two fewer games than Jalen. Excuse me, that Nazir played. Well, that Jalen Carter played in two fewer games than Nazir did. But Nazir had 13 total tackles, about two a game, not bad at all. 14 hurries, that's one. Obviously, the block kick, that's a big deal. Jalen Carter had 32 tackles, of which seven were more tackles for losses. Everything Jalen Carter did, Nazir Stackhouse did about half as much in terms of the pressure game. So, tackles for loss, no, Jalen had seven. Nazir had three. Uh, Three of those seven pressures, tackles for losses, were sacks. He had 31. Jalen Carter. He had 31 quarterback hurries. Well, guess what you're going to try to replace him with? Mikael Williams. He had 31 pressures of the quarterback. Played in 15 games. Went with 28 total tackles. Six and a half of which were for a loss. Four and a half of those six and a half were sacks. He was, I'm pretty sure he was the leading sack guy for Georgia. This past season. Zion Logue played in 14 of the 15 games, 16 tackles total. Really a people eater, a person eater. Warren Brinson, 14 quarterback hurries in 15 games. He did not play all those games. Bear Alexander, 13 quarterback hurries. In 12 games. And see, so stuff just starts adding up after a while. And that group, generally speaking, is going to have, a lot to say about where Georgia goes forward on the defensive line. I think replacing Jalen, that's not happening. There's no person that comes in and like you're like, oh, okay, this guy's got Jalen's spot. No, I mean they're going to occupy that position, which is probably Bear or maybe Zion Logue, but or excuse me, it would be Bear or Nazir. Those guys seem to play inside more, but they're not going to replace the production. I mean, again, Jalen Carter, 13 games, 32 tackles. Some of the games that he played in the 13s, he didn't really play. He didn't really play against Missouri. He didn't really play a lot against Florida. He was only playing on third down. So Jalen probably really played about 10 games, maybe nine. And he has some very significant uh, numbers. Two forced fumbles. One of those was against Tennessee. 31 quarterback hurries. Now, Georgia's getting that from their linebackers too. 23 from Small Munden, 26 from Pop. So they're getting pressure on the quarterback. When you look at uh, how much pressure quarterbacks are getting, they're getting pressured. You're not going to sack guys the way we used to see, when Kirby was playing, or even 10 years ago. David Green was 20 years ago. You don't see that as much because the quarterbacks are more mobile. The ball gets out quicker, so you're not going to see sort of quarterback hurries might be the better statistic to judge pressure. But everybody's getting their pressure, and it's coming from all over the place. I mean, the linebackers had more than 50. You've got Nazir and Robert Beal and just Nazir and Mikael Williams themselves, excuse me, have 45. So if it's just about pressure, I don't know that you're going to be able to replace Jalen Carter. The other thing is, are you going to be able to run easier against the Dogs this season than last? Um, Probably. Okay, probably because they were just so good um, against the run, particularly these last 2 years. I mean, they were number one in the country this past season against the run, giving up only 77 yards a game. And, it's going to be hard to sort of better that. A season ago they were at 78. Well, not quite 79. So they've been back to back number one and number two in the country in run defense. I mean, why do y'all? I mean, it's not that hard to understand why they're winning championships. If you cannot run the ball, you can't set the mold. You can't. What does that mean? You can't set yourself up for second and 5, all right? Just to get a long run on first down. And what I mean long, I mean 3 yards or more, okay? That changes the trajectory of everything, okay? If you do that, it's just so much harder to defend second and 6 or third and 5 versus third and 8. I mean, you're just not going to win a lot against Georgia on third and 8. There's not going to be a lot of converted first downs because people say, well, oh, we'll just throw it. Yeah, if you can block them from rushing the passer, we just talked about how many quarterback pressures there are. So that's the challenge. Now, who will really do it? I don't know. Bear Alexander really looked good last year, but Bear is not the physical, does not have the physical prowess, I don't think. Now I could be wrong. I don't think Bear Alexander is going to be, talked about as a first round, a number one overall, possible number one overall pick. But look, everybody in this picture is coming back. I mean, you got Beal in there, but everybody else, you got, Walker, Bear, and Williams. They're all there. And look how pissed off Max Duggan is. That's what they do to these quarterbacks, man. Great shot there from Dylan Weber. Make sure you're picking up Double Dogs. Thanks for watching.